Hello, Bible readers. Uh, I'm on chapter 2, verse 4b through chapter 3:24. We are going deep into Genesis. I would love to actually take about twice as much time on chapter 2, but I'm going to name some of the most important pieces. Number one, this is not a second creation story. And chapter 2 can't be separated from chapter 3. That's why we're going to think about them together. They are parts of a whole. This is a text about human destiny. So it's not just about creation, or it's definitely not about how God creates. In a nutshell, the destiny of the human creation is to live in God's world with God's other creatures on God's terms. That's what this text is about. Brueggemann says no text in Genesis, or likely in the entire Bible, has been more used, interpreted, and misunderstood than this text. This applies to careless popular theology, he says, as well as the doctrine of the church. Wow, right? So this is a problematic text, always has been, right at the beginning of the Bible. He names 5 large misunderstandings that have to be dealt with before we can get into what it does mean. So this is one of those texts that we have to have it deconstructed in our minds before we can start to understand what it is meant to mean from the beginning. So number one, it's been assumed that this is a decisive text for the whole Bible, as though it states a premise for all that follows. No, Brueggemann says. Instead, he calls it really a marginal text. What he means by that is that it's never referred to again in the Old Testament. Its actual role in the Bible is small. You don't hear Moses or Elijah or Isaiah or Jesus or anyone saying, well, we have to overcome what happened in Genesis 2, the fall. So that's an important piece, that this is more of a marginal text than it is a definitive, foundational central text for the Bible. Not to say it's completely unimportant. It's just not decisive, as Brueggemann says. Number 2, oftentimes this story is treated as an account of the fall. Brueggemann says no. In fact, that would be the opposite of what this story is trying to say. In general, the Old Testament doesn't even assume such a fall ever happens. Deuteronomy 30, for example, and that there's even a law to begin with to be followed, they're more likely to assume that humanity is completely capable of obedience. And how could humanity be capable of obedience, of following the law, if there was a fall that we haven't recovered from and can't recover from? So Brueggemann would say this whole idea of a fall is a misunderstanding. Number 3, often this text is treated as though it's an explanation of how evil came into the world. No. Much like Genesis 1 is not interested in the abstract issue of how the world was created, this text is not interested in how evil came to be. Instead, it's interested in how humans can effectively cope with evil. Evil exists. Where did it come from? How did it happen? That's not what these chapters are trying to answer. It exists. The question this text is trying to answer is, how do we respond? What can a faithful response look like? Number 4, similarly, sometimes this text is taken to be an account of the origin of death in the world. No. Brueggemann says a variety of responses to the reality of death are offered, much like the last one, what can a faithful response to evil look like? That's a lot like this one. What can a faithful response to death look like? Brueggemann points out that it's worth noting that no one dies in this text. This is not a reflection on death, but on troubled, anxiety-ridden life. That's a greater problem than death, both then and now. Interesting. The 5th misunderstanding, popular tradition focuses on questions of sex and the evil wrought by sex. Don't get stuck on the mention of nakedness. The medieval church sure did. This is a text about the dynamics of power, control, and autonomy. To make it about gender or sex is just like missing the forest for the trees. Basically, he's saying that the usual abstract questions, the kinds of questions that in my experience confirmands and college-age kids love to spin their wheels about, questions about the origin of sin and death and the meaning of the fall, they are likely to be false, escapist questions. He says such questions are no part of biblical testimony and of no interest to genuine faith. The Bible is not an answer book to all the curious questions we may ask. Of very many such questions, we may, along with the Bible, be prepared to say, we do not know. There is much that we do not need to know and have not been given to know. We may rather focus on what has been entrusted to us in the gospel. And the gospel in this story is this. The good news in chapter 2 and 3 of Genesis is that although humanity chooses to alienate itself from God, God remains resolved to overcome our alienation with renewal. Thanks be to God. All right, tomorrow we're going to dive deep into chapter 4, verses 1 to 16. Don't forget to journal after this post, a star, a question mark, a heart, and reflect on the different misunderstandings, perhaps. And then, we'll keep going through these 11 chapters of Genesis this week. I'm one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.